Hey patrons, thank you so much for all of the continued support. It's very much appreciated. And I am done. Okay, so I just finished up reading Into the Labyrinth. This is book 1 in the Mage Errant series by John Bierce. And I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing this book, which was just right now. So, yeah, I disliked this book from the first sentence until the end. And I did have some interesting concepts that made me not entirely hate it. But it still didn't pull this up, those concepts, and a couple of the things that I did like from being anything but a 2-star rating, which I don't love to give, but I have to. I really don't want to give this because this book was actually recommended to me through a Patreon pick where there's like a raffle every month and whatever wins I have to read. And I would love to just give positive reviews to everything, but I just can't. And so this is nothing against the person that recommended it to me. I should like this. Everything that I've read should tell me that I would like this. And it was on my longer term TBR to eventually read. And yeah, it just didn't work. Not work as a book, just not work for me. I get why people like this. But yeah, it didn't hit the notes that I wanted to hit. And I really wanted to like this one because this is a progression fantasy. If you're not familiar with progression fantasy, it is a subgenre of fantasy where the characters kind of like build up in strength, stronger and stronger and stronger as they go along. Each book, they're kind of stronger than the one before. It's got this nice kind of linear progression to the story. Brandon Sanderson has some elements of that in like Stormlight Archive where characters are getting stronger. I think really popular ones in that genre are like Wandering In, Mother of Learning, and I think the most popular one would be Cradle by Will White. And it's kind of something that I've found that I love. I don't know that I've ever read a progression fantasy up until now that I didn't enjoy. It's one of my favorite subgenres and something that I've kind of carved a little niche out on this YouTubing because I don't think a lot of people talk about these kind of books. But yeah, it's so I really wanted to like this. And this one's considered one of the staples for that genre. If you were to go on like the progression fantasy subreddit and ask the question, which would probably get deleted right away because people have asked it a million times, what do I need to read to start out my progression fantasy journey? There would be a few recommendations, and this one would be on that list. So yeah, it's I'm sad about it, but it is what it is. So overall on this story, this is like a YA coming of age magic school story. Where the character is way more powerful than he originally thought. And he just kind of comes to find out that about himself and start out his magic journey. There's not much more to the story here. You're kind of dropped in with this character already at the school. And eventually he has to go on this big quest to kind of progress himself in this journey. And it's telegraphed what this quest is going to be within the first few chapters. And that's ultimately the entire book summarized for you. I don't think I'm spoiling anything here, but that's the book. Starting out this book, in the first sentence of this book, the author described something as very, very good. And I immediately knew that the writing of this book was probably going to be something I had a problem with and not the greatest thing. And unfortunately, that held up true from the beginning to the end. And personally, I can excuse writing that isn't great. I like a lot of authors that people would consider not great at the technical writing aspect of things. But this just felt very amateurish. It really felt like something that I would write if I was a writer. And I'm not a writer. And I know that I can never be one. But when I'm reading this, I was like, oh, I could do this, no problem. It's not just like the very, very good thing. That is just a sample of what you have to go here. In fact, I did a search for very, very, and that came up a handful of times as the author's like preferred way to describe something that's, really something is, it's just, I don't know. It's kind of sad, but it is what it is. So going back to the story, this felt like this book was trying to emulate the success of Harry Potter in a lot of ways. I mean, we've got this main character whose parents have died. He's constantly being bullied. He ends up being way more powerful than he ever thought he could be. And while I've never fully read a Harry Potter book, I'm currently reading the first one very slowly to my daughter. We have ebbs and flows, but It's a nighttime thing we read right before bed, so I'm going really slowly through it. But, you know, and I don't love Harry Potter by any means, but I can say that just of what I've read so far in Harry Potter, it's like Harry Potter with all of the charm just pulled away from it. You know, it's just zapped away because of how quickly we move from point A to point B in this book. You know, you don't have any love for the main character. It's just ultimately feels soulless. Like, is a quick example. Like, in the beginning of the story, there's this small team of students that have to come together to work together, and they all hate each other. And then, like, 2 pages later, they're all best friends. They tell each other their backstories. You get these huge info dumps, and now we're the bestest of best friends. There's just no development here. Not just character development. I'm saying development in general. Nothing has time to just culminate. It just goes bang, bang, bang. You know, one of my biggest problems here in this book is that the main character here lacks all sense of agency. More than any other book that I think I've ever read. Like, every single decision that the main character makes here, it's like ultimately made for him. It ruins every sense of feeling like the character is a real person. And it ruins like a lot of the sense of well-developed characters. Like, he doesn't think or act like a human does. He's not likable. He's just like this weak, soft-spoken coward the whole book. And he started that way and he ended that way. This would be fine if he started this way and he developed in any discernible way. I mean, I think this book is like 6+ books, so we don't need the character to jump like these huge jumps from the beginning of this book to the end. But he just remained the exact same passive self that he was at the beginning, and it's just so hard to root for him. I don't like the main character. I don't hate him. I just certainly don't like him. Now, there are a lot of characters in fantasy that I don't like that are evil. But they're well developed. They're good characters. And I like reading about them, even though I don't like them, if that makes sense. This book in general just kind of felt like it was chock full, 100% full of tropes and like completely formulaic. Like the author, it feels like what the author did, and I could be very wrong here, but it feels like he jotted down these bullet points of like where he wanted the story to go. And then it's like everything he's trying to do is to draw a line between one bullet point to the next as quickly and as straightforward as humanly possible. Let's just check. Like Brandon Sanderson times 1,000. You know, I've had that criticism with Sanderson. I still love his writing. I love him. I love most of his books. But he has some of that in him where he does that, especially with characters. And this one felt like, it's like, oh, that's what I should do, and I'll just like go crazy with it. The characters themselves, like even the main one, it's just like they lacked all sense of complexity. The author's approach to these characters is to randomly throw in backstories right at the beginning of the book. It's just a huge info dump that doesn't feel natural at all. In fact, like even the magic here feels info dumped. Like the author was so excited to tell you about what he's developed here that he didn't let it naturally just come out. Everything is explained. Nothing gets discovered. It's just told to you. I mean, there's even moments here because, you know, at the beginning of this book, the character spends a lot of time in a library. And the character will just like open up a book and read it out loud. And that's the way he info dumps to you. Like that's the more creative way that the author info dumps to you. And I find that just kind of not enjoyable to read about. I want things to come out more naturally. That's what the great authors do. The great authors aren't telling you exactly what to think. They're showing you. You know, that something happens and you're supposed to piece it together and you're like, oh, that's kind of how the magic works. But no one would ever just like explain it to somebody else. That would feel so unnatural. But that's what happens here. In fact, it's done a lot of times in this third person way where it's just the narrator telling the reader how things work. And that's just not my kind of thing. Having said all that, though, I did enjoy the magic itself when you get down to the root of it. I mean, it's complex. It deserves some praise. And it does appeal to those that do enjoy a harder magic system. And I'll also say on the more positive column that there's a lot of like mythical creatures here that are just clearly created just for this book. They're not like pulled out of a Dungeons & Dragons manual. And they added a lot of good flavor and fun to this book. And those two elements really kept me from wanting to DNF this book. And I really wanted to get through to the end. And it wasn't very hard. This book's like 215 pages. It is tiny. I flew through this thing in like a night, and then the next day I was done. And so it's really easy like to say, you know, this book is not great, but I'm going to finish it because it's short. If this book were like 700, 800 pages, that'd be a different story. I don't know that I would have the motivation to go through it. So, you know, if you are a huge progression fantasy fan, I think you should read this. If you are into YA type stories and you like progression type things or like the idea of that kind of thing, you'll probably really like this kind of thing. I have no dispersions against YA and YA type stories. You know, I think every book deserves its place, and it's trying to appeal to certain people. No book's going to appeal to everybody. This just didn't really appeal to me. I don't feel like it's written for somebody like me that at the end of the day enjoys things more complex. I enjoy things a little darker. And if I can have my way, I'd want the writing quality to be a little bit higher as well. So, yep, that's it for me. I'm not going to keep reading this series, even though I really wish I liked it. And I've also heard that there's this other series that I really want to read in the progression fantasy realm. I think it's called Sufficiently Advanced Magic, that this book is kind of ripping off. I kind of wish I read that one first so I could see how bad it rips it off. You know, when I was getting towards the tail end of this book, I went on Goodreads and I had a couple people say that, like, wow, this is a hard ripoff, like blatant ripoff. And I wish I could give you that background, but it's making me not want to read that one as much anymore. I'll still do it, but yeah, my motivation for that one has now just kind of been zapped quite a bit. So we'll see. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all of my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, Brian, CJ, Darren, Gregory, Jonathan, My Book is Lit, Miranda's Bookshelf, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tahir, Anna, Andra, Angelo, Ben, Blair, Brock, Evan, Harry B, Jamie, Joe, Maria, Michael Sugarman, Sky, TW57, Wacky, and Zion.